All right. I'm going to wait just a second. Oh, there we go. First try. That's awesome. All right. We're going to get started. What? No way. 999. Woohoo! Who's going to be our 1000th follower? What the heck? Yes. That's hilarious. All right. We're going over 1,000 tonight, everybody. Okay, so what you need to do is go on all your social media and repaste um this uh broadcast and share it with everybody and tell them if you're not following us, get over here and follow us because we're at 999. That's crazy. Okay, so if you haven't read the article that I posted today about um, Lumumba, who was the prime minister of Congo, I highly encourage you to go to Substack, search on the Colonel's Corner, and read that article. I made it free for everybody because it's critically important to understand what we're dealing with. So, within the last several days, someone had made a comment when I had reported a tidbit that I had come across that he was basically the first um, assassination under the auspices of Gladio. And I haven't chronologically checked that out. I was just posting about it. And I had indicated that he was a head of state because at the time the Congo had a prime minister and a president. And someone said that he wasn't technically the prime minister, which I thought was kind of weird because I had remember reading that he was. So I went back to check facts and found out a whole bunch of stuff. So I wrote an article about it. And technically, the person was correct. It was a good catch. However, the reason why he was correct is because the CIA had paid off the president to unconstitutionally fire him as the prime minister. They were basically a brand new, um, they call themselves a republic. They did have a constitution. Republic is in the name of the Congo, like People's Republic of Congo. So I don't know whether or not they were an actual republic or not, but the fact that the CIA was the one that was behind him basically getting fired, and then they also arranged for him to be kidnapped, subsequently murdered, hacked up, and put into acid to do away with him. Um, the reason why I thought it was so important to write the article is because there is no better example of the depravity of these people, depravity of these people, and what they won't, there's nothing they won't do to get done what they want to do. So I believe it's critically important for people to understand what is being done with our tax dollars and in our name around the world. So that's the reason why I wrote it. I encourage everybody to go over there and read the article. I hope you will. So, with that said, um, I'm not sure if I don't refresh this page whether or not, and I don't want to do that because I don't want to screw anything up, whether I'll even know whether we go over 1,000. So, Bridget, um, Please keep an eye on that. Um, I don't have any beer to drink. I don't have any wine to drink, but we're definitely going to pat ourselves on the back if we do that tonight. All right, so we're on chapter 7 in the Skorzeny book. And the other reason why it's so important at the time, when we were talking about Africa, is because Skorzeny goes to Africa. He takes operational direction from the CIA to conduct operations throughout the continent of Africa. So I just thought it was very important to highlight that in their sick depravity. Okay. So, where we're at tonight, the OAS fights on. And keep in mind, the OAS is basically a Gladio cell that fought in Algeria to keep Algerians imprisoned as a colony to France. So, these are not good guys. They get worse. So, upon the collapse of the French general's coup that happened, the OAS swore to fight on. The main goal of the organization was to prevent Algerian independence by whatever means necessary, which included targeting President Charles de Gaulle. It would usher in an extremely violent era of history. The OAS turned to a terror campaign directed at the Muslim populations in order to provoke a response in kind, hoping to force the French army to reestablish its authority. The OAS, the first order of business after the failed coup, was to reorganize officers and enlisted men from the now disbanded ranks of the French army units who had joined the OAS. A new command and control structure was established, as well as zones of responsibility. A Colonel Yves Goddard, the former commander of the 11th Shock Regiment, was now underground from the military, excuse me, for his participation in the coup. He took on an active lead in creating this new OAS structure. So Goddard had studied carefully, and he created OAS terror cells across Algeria. Others, so they're basically setting up an Operation Gladio operation in Algeria. Other senior colonels joined the organization, men with extensive intel, psychological operation, counterinsurgency, warfare experience, including a guy by the name of Anton Argaud and Jean Gardez. The senior OAS commander was General Raoul Salon. Acting as his deputy was General Edmond Jahard. Chief of Staff was General Paul Gardy, the former IG of the Foreign Legion. Oh, so Paul Gardy was the former IG of the Foreign Legion. Colonel Godard was going to be the operations officer. They basically set up a staff section, a psychological warfare and propaganda section, and an intel and operations section. They had action squads, each under a captain. The commandos carried out bombings and assassinations. One of the most notorious action groups of the OAS was the Delta Commandos under a Lieutenant Roger de Gary, a former Foreign Legion officer who had deserted the French army. He was a tough 36-year-old combat veteran of both Vietnam and the Algerian wars. He was born in France, but in a town that was on the border of Belgium. There were several people that believed that he had served in the German SS. He had seen action from the time that he was 17 years old He served in ultra paramilitary units while serving in Algeria. He was a key participant in the failed coup attempt on de Gaulle in 1961. After the Algerian coup, he became an assistant to Dr. Perez, then later took command of the Delta Commandos. Many of the men in Delta Commando were former soldiers of the disbanded Foreign Legion. They would eventually number about 300. In the latter part of 61, over 3,000 attacks per month were attributed to the Deltas. He was eventually captured in April 62 and subsequently executed by a firing squad in July. The Alpha Commandos was led by a Jacques Aucard, a close friend of Clifford Forster, Otto Skorzeny's business partner. Forster was the chairman of a CIA-backed American Committee for France and Algeria. The committee was pro-OAS. Jacques Aucard directed OAS activity in Algiers. Noted as an extremely dangerous man, Aucard was characterized by the police as the most dangerous man of all and capable of carrying out an attempt on de Gaulle's life single-handedly. OAS officer with Skorzeny links was another one, was Captain Pierre Sargent, a former legionnaire. Sargent had commanded a company from the French Foreign Legion, a unit disbanded by de Gaulle. He was a seasoned soldier, having fought in the resistance during World War II. He fought in Indochina, where he was wounded and decorated. He was to serve in Algeria, where he was deeply devoted to the cause of keeping Algeria a French colony. Hospitalized in France just prior to the coup, he secretly returned to Algeria and led the Foreign Legion paratroopers in support of the rebellious generals. Once the coup had failed and his unit disbanded, Sargent went underground, joining OAS. Later, he would rise to be the leader of OAS in France. Captain Sargent and Aucard, along with other OAS commandos, used safe houses in Algiers to discuss operations. One of the most secret houses was owned by a Contessa Dagmar Alvarez de Toledo Luzon. The confirmation of her residence as an OAS base comes from a letter written by the Countess to Otto Skorzeny in 1964, and this author has that letter. She also recounted her days harboring OAS operatives in Algeria. She referred to her dwelling as the OAS for Captain Sargent. She noted in the letter that she had great respect for Captain Sargent and the others, stating, quote, "Everyone spoke of you with admiration," unquote, referencing Skorzeny. Now, keep in mind that when Skorzeny was basically escaping Germany and ended up in Austria, he ended up in the house of Elsie, his future wife, because she was a heiress due to the fact that she had married a very rich man. So seems to be repeating itself here. Interestingly, she had also harbored SS soldiers at the end of World War II. Describing the event to Skorzeny, she proudly wrote that they were quartered, quote, "quartered in my castle," unquote. Expressing her own personal admiration for Skorzeny, she wrote, "You and your comrades are the last knights in the last crusades." These women just love them dangerous men. So Reorganized after the failed coup, the OAS leadership continued to look for outside assistance, including approaches to Portugal, Spain, Israel, and South Africa. All countries, it should be noted, dealing directly with Skorzeny in covert matters. So basically, we see that Portugal and Spain are fascist dictators at the time. Israel is being ran as a very authoritarian country at the time, and so is South Africa because this is during apartheid. So those are all countries that Skorzeny has operations going on, and now he's adding Algeria to that as well. The primary patron would continue to be the American CIA, who did not give up on the OAS as a vehicle to undermine de Gaulle. General Salon and a Colonel Brown of the CIA were in contact with each other in France. The author was unable to identify who Colonel Brown is, but Harrison claims Brown offered the OAS commander enough weapons to equip an army. Colonel Brown, who is of the CIA, also set down the conditions for the U.S. support, telling the rogue French general that if the OAS were successful in gaining control of Algeria, the U.S. would immediately recognize it, and they wanted to be able to build military bases in the region. Not unlike what the deal they struck with Spain. General Salon would later reflect on his belief that he was dealing directly with the CIA. I was sure they were serious because they knew all of the right people and their credentials were perfect. The CIA contacts were also reflected in December 1961. He wrote a confidential letter to President Kennedy explaining the OAS position and appealing for support. Solon alluded in the letter to Colonel Brown's offer of assistance on the condition of allowing U.S. bases in Algeria, telling the president France would play its part in defense, necessitating the integration of all Atlantic forces. He then added, within this defensive system, American bases on French soil, particularly in Algeria, will clearly constitute the weapon of deterrence which Europe and Africa so sorely need. Solon's letter was sent to Washington by a special U.S. Air Force aircraft dispatched under orders from Al Ulmer, the CIA station chief in Paris. So, stamp, 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 CIA all over this. President Kennedy decided not to authorize assistance to the general and forbid CIA operations supporting OAS. Yeah, that didn't work out too well. In light of the subsequent events, it appears support did continue, however, albeit through surrogates such as Skorzeny. Skorzeny's close contact with the U.S. MAG groups and his extensive paramilitary training camps, CIA support could have easily been facilitated without formal authority. Under this cover, Skorzeny could direct unconventional warfare support to the OAS for the CIA. So the irony that President Kennedy forbids the CIA to do any work at all with the OAS, and yet the OAS is in Dallas, Texas, November 22nd, 1963, working with the CIA. Oddly, it is Skorzeny's Congo connections that, and this is the part, because I had already read this, that brought me to Lumumba to begin with. So oddly, it was Skorzeny's connections that reveal further evidence of his direct involvement in OAS affairs. Skorzeny's episode in the Congo as QJ Win was covered earlier. In a bizarre twist, the Congo crisis and the Algerian War were very closely linked in the history of Otto Skorzeny. The relation derives from French soldiers who fought first in Algeria, then later as mercenaries in the Congo, merging the two histories. Skorzeny in 1961 had offered the CIA backed breakaway country of Katanga training for the Katanga army at his commando schools in Spain. Now, let me put this in perspective based on the research we just did. Congo, as a country, was a Belgium colony. And Belgium, there was a lot of crap going on in the 50s and 60s of Africa wanting their own freedom. They were having big conferences, blah, blah, blah. So what Belgium decided to do is they were going to grant Congo their freedom, but not really. So they made everyone fully recognize the fact that this was a figment of their imagination. They weren't going to be free. During the speech of the actual Freedom Day, the Belgium authorities told them basically, just cool your jets. Don't be getting fancy pants here and go off and think you're going to do things on your own because you're stupid and you don't know how to do that yet. So you really have to let us be in charge. And you just look like you're in charge. Well, they weren't having any of it. Patrice was not. So he basically gave him the middle finger and basically started setting up his country. Well, that pissed Belgium off. And then Belgium, to add insult to injury, said, "Oh, and you know that part over there that has all your resources and your wealth? Yeah, you can't have that. Those people, that area is going to have all the Belgian forces, army guarding it. You're not allowed to have any of it." Now, keep in mind that this is like 1960s. The Belgians has had this since the late 1800s, and even before that. They have been raping and pillaging this country for for the better like 100 years, stealing all of their resources, using their citizens as slave labor to take their own resources out. And for a good period of time, the king of Belgium had it as his own personal. It didn't even belong to Belgium. When he conquered it, it was his personal. He enriched himself. And it wasn't until the early 1900s that he goes, "Oh, okay, well, yeah, we'll make it a Belgium colony because I want to use the Belgium army because they're getting a little uppity down there." So during all of this, the whole thing was a show. The whole freedom of the Congo, that was all a show. We're going to keep all of the mines, and they actually had diamond mines there too, and a lot uranium, a lot of resources, right? So that part you're not allowed to have, and you're not allowed to even come there. So that's this Katanga part is that part. That was the name of the part that the Belgium army stayed occupying. So let me read this again. Skorzeny in 1961 had offered the CIA-backed breakaway country of Katanga training for the Katanga army in his commando schools in Spain. This offer was accepted, and in mid-March 1961, 30 Katanga soldiers arrived in Spain for the special training. Journalist Waverly Root, who had exposed Skorzeny's link to the ultra leader Joseph Ortiz and Rene Kovacs, also described the complex intrigue between the French ultras in Algeria. The sympathetic Belgian rightist and former French soldiers fighting in the Belgian Congo for the newly declared country Katanga. Again, Root's information zeroed in on Skorzeny's network. Now, I didn't include this part in my article because I didn't want to get ahead of the game and we just be reading this for nothing tonight. So we will update it because I wanted to be able to tie this into our Skorzeny book without everybody knowing the answers before. The Algerian Katanga connection was also revealed in March 21st, 1962 article in the Dallas Morning News. This article detailed the violence of the OAS and citing a New York Times author, Sulzberger, who we've come across before, the OAS relies on 2 Katanga mercenary veterans to organize its murder squads. The article also mentioned that the French government's response and reported the existence of a special security detachment called the Yatagan Commandos, Yatagan, composed of French veterans from the Indochina War and Vietnamese, tasked to hunt down the OAS organization. As multiple documents correlate precisely, there can be little doubt that Sulzberger's reference to an OAS murder squad utilizing 2 Katanga mercenary veterans is none other than Skorzeny's commando group. There is also indications that Skorzeny's OAS commandos' involvement was an extension of, and in some ways connected to, the CIA covert operations in Algeria. This CIA link comes from the mention of an OAS group written about in the book Target de Gaulle. The authors noted that the existence of an organization called the Johnson, Jonson, Commando. They stated that this group had actually appeared on the scene prior to April 1961 coup in Algeria. The Johnson Commando also had tangible yet mysterious links to Otto Skorzeny. According to the authors of that Target de Gaulle book, Johnson Commandos consisted of Americans and Canadians in direct touch with the CIA and was attempting to contact student circles. Here we have to take note of the similarities in the name Johnson Commandos and the name of the previously mentioned U.S. Foreign Service officer serving in Algeria at the time, Richard Johnson, Johnsson. Could the Johnson Commando be connected to the U.S. Foreign Service officer Johnson? The evidence for an affirmative answer is compelling. Johnson claimed that while at his post in Algiers, he was an impartial observer in this affair. But Johnson had an interesting link to Otto Skorzeny. Perhaps a coincidence, which we don't believe in. One of Johnson's closest friends was a CIA officer by the name of Steve Tanner, who apparently developed a friendship with Skorzeny after World War II when Tanner worked for the CIA. Johnson and Tanner had served in the same military intelligence unit during World War II. They were serving in Italy, where they were assigned to interrogate captured members of Skorzeny's Jagerbon operating in the country. It was at this time that Tanner coordinated one of the first clandestine uses of SS by the U.S. Army counterintelligence units. Future research is needed to determine if Tanner was involved with the CIA covert operations in Algeria, but Tanner did maintain a post-war relationship with Skorzeny, whom he referred to in post-war correspondence as my old friend Tanner. So this guy is, the author here is saying that he has Skorzeny correspondence with Tanner. Since Skorzeny was also involved with early CIA covert operations directed by Tanner in Germany, an argument can be made that Tanner continued to be a CIA conduit for Skorzeny throughout his clandestine service to the agency, such as the case with Arthur Silver, Miles Copeland, and Al Umer. Johnson also met with generals during the coup. He also revealed, that was actually revealed in an interview with Johnson. He also revealed that in the same interview, when speaking about the OAS, that there existed a kind of funny supporting group of the OAS. He said they contained quote unquote students. Johnson's comment that the OAS had a group of supported students seems to align with the description given by the two other authors about the Johnson commandos seeking student circles. In fact, OAS commander Jacques Zuzini, who later admitted to meeting with Skorzeny in Madrid, was the leader of the General Association of Students, a cover organization for paramilitary. It would seem all of the above evidence that the CIA had a conduit to the OAS through Skorzeny, who was advising or even directing various OAS commandos. It is written that an internal OAS communication indicated that the Johnson Commandos was offering weapons and potential financial assistance to the recruitment of its members. Clearly, the CIA would be in a position to do precisely these things. Skorzeny acting as a cutout between these two organizations is highly plausible. In addition, an internal OAS communication warning its own members that the Johnson Commando may be most telling reads this way, quote, "This commando is extremely dangerous," unquote. Coming from an OAS, an organization known for extreme violence, this comment speaks volumes about Skorzeny's network. In March 1962, the French government signed the Evian Accords, initiating a former ceasefire in Algeria. As part of the agreement, France was to keep control of industrial interests in the country and control of the Sahara oil reserves. You see how they do that? This is the exact same damn thing that they were doing in Congo. Yeah, you can have your freedom, but you don't get any of your shit. Ugh. French Algerians and Jewish members were given religious freedom and property rights. A plan for the withdrawal of French forces was also included in a 2-year period, with the exception of the garrison. So they're going to keep an army base there. The OAS opposed the Evian Accords. They had lost their battle to keep Algeria French, and they were outlawed. After the Evian Accords, the OAS fought on only for revenge for honor alone. The elimination of de Gaulle would become their primary goal. Between 61 and 62, the OAS conducted thousands of attacks. They targeted basically a whole bunch of different things in Algeria, generally Muslim populations, French officials, and officers loyal to de Gaulle. The attacks were carried out in Algeria and in metropolitan France. But despite the OAS attacks, de Gaulle pushed forward and granted Algeria their independence. Well, kind of. They just want all their shit still. He also created a new intel organization to hunt down the OAS. Now that the reader has a history of Otto Skorzeny's involvement in the French-Algerian conflict, the key individuals associated with it, we turn our attention to a guy by the name of Captain Jean-René Sortre, an important OAS officer who would join the ranks of Otto Skorzeny's private paramilitary. Jean-René was born in 1930 in France as an OAS operative. He has as many as 11 aliases. He was about 6 feet tall with a muscular build. native French, spoke perfect English, Spanish, and German. He was married 3 times. His family was traditionally military. This guy enlisted in the French Air Force, but by 1954, he had been commissioned as a junior officer and was an airborne soldier. He was under the command of a Colonel Colette, a remarkable officer who had been given permission to create the air commandos for fighting in Algeria. He had also been in World War II as a parachute captain. After the war, he served as a French diplomat and remained in the reserves. He re-entered the service to establish air commandos in France. They were a very small unit of about 200, and they were attached to the Foreign Legion parachute regiments. They would later be disbanded by de Gaulle for having a leading role in the April 1961 general's coup in Algeria. So he was a rabid supporter of the ultras and for keeping Algeria French. So Jean René was assigned to command the French Air Commando Training Battalion in 1960, the unit's connection to Skorzeny's training school. So part of Skorzeny's training included the parachuting and air commandos and that type of thing. And so this guy would have been working very closely with Skorzeny. He also worked with the Lieutenant Herbert, that was an American Ranger. They were tasked with learning unconventional warfare tactics. So the U.S. Lieutenant Herbert had learned about Skorzeny's school for the commandos being used by the French. Herbert's men would eventually find themselves at the very camp in the mountains of Spain, just across the border from France, which is where Skorzeny's training schools were. Lieutenant Herbert would meet with Jean René, but all of them were very familiar with the Skorzeny training sites. So Jean René was in trouble with the French authorities by 1960, who had taken notice of his political views in Algeria. So he goes AWOL. Jean René does. He next surfaces in Algeria and organizes resistance. He creates leaflets and to target French military to desert. And let's see, there was 5, him and 3 sergeants and another guy were all arrested in Muslim Religious Brotherhood sanctuary in Algeria. After his arrest, he was transferred to France and then back to Algeria to a prison. The group was transferred again, and for security reasons, this was before the French coup. It was decided to place Jean René in a special military tribunal after the coup. The members of his organization was placed on trial. 4 days later, he was sentenced to a 3-year sentence, and then it was suspended. But instead of release, they transferred him to a different location in Algeria, and he was given generous liberties. He was allowed to get married, and the camp commander assisted in the marriage ceremony. Nothing like being in jail when you're an OAS member. So They travel to Portugal with his wife, and he gets false identification paper, which of course we know that's from Agenter Press, which is the Operation Gladio facility there, because it was in a press facility, which is they get fake passports and travel certificates and all kinds of different things for all of Operation Gladio. So his wife ends up leaving him and returns to France. But because all of her documentation is fake, she gets arrested and then basically disappears. He makes his way back to Algeria, where he is going to be working for Jacques Accard and Pierre Sargent. And of course, they're friends with Skorzeny's business partner, Clifford Forster. This seals tight with OAS circles around Skorzeny. The association with Pierre Sargent would also place him at a safe house ran by the Contessa, who just absolutely loves Skorzeny. So as the war between de Gaulle and the OAS ramps up, de Gaulle's political agenda continued to move forward with Algeria. The French government had started the negotiations already. And then by March 1962, the ceasefire had happened, setting the stage for the Evian negotiations that we just talked about. The OAS is in its final phase before Algerian independence was in a desperate state. Terror attacks escalated. The organization took to robbing banks and generating funds for additional weapons. De Gaulle had ordered his intelligence organization to hunt down the OAS members. The intelligence services such as SDECE and the DST were mainly targeting the Muslim element of it and not the actual rank and file of the OAS. The man appointed by de Gaulle to take charge of targeting OAS was a guy by the name of Jacques Foccart, Foccart. He went so far as to call the DST an OAS rabble. To solve the internal situation, he reorganized the old de Gaulle intelligence services and purged any disloyal members. So this organization, called the SAC, executed ruthless counter-terror operations against the OAS. It recruited into its ranks of the SAC were bearded ones, whatever that means. It was a phrase that they used for a unit that was used in Vietnam for torture. This description appears to match the French news reporting of the Yatagan commandos that were composed of French veterans and Vietnamese targeting the OAS. So we have a death squad of the OAS, and we form another death squad to kill the other death squad. Crazy shit. Yet despite these counter-terrorist operations, the French intelligence, the OAS, soldiered on. By April 20th, 1962, the commander of the OAS, General Salon, was arrested in Algiers. This development, combined with increasing isolation of the organization, had a dramatic effect. In May, the OAS killed 230 Muslims in a single week in Algeria and escalated attacks inside of France. The new internal reorganization took place under two individuals in the National Resistance Council, NCR. Other OAS groups also began to break ranks as the group began to splinter into separate factions. By May of 1962, the organization began to take flight out of Algeria to other points in Europe. General Gardy, who had replaced Salon as the OAS commander, departed Algeria, establishing a new headquarters in Spain, because that's where all these fascists end up, in Spain. Spanish intelligence, sympathetic to the OAS, provided much assistance. And of course, that's where Skorzeny is. So he's basically just bringing his agents back home. The French government also begins to lean on the Spanish government to arrest the outlaws. The OAS established several areas for consolidating their forces inside of Spain. One of the more prominent was Palma de Marcata. Historians have identified this area as a major safe haven and operational zone for OAS during the year 1962. In fact, OAS leadership were at the time investing in real estate in that area, because they're assassins and they're just going to buy their safe houses there. Not coincidentally, Skorzeny was heavily involved in hotel constructions in that city in 1962. So there's the leader, that General Sautre, was said to have used the alias Commander Constant in his business dealings inside of that city. He also controlled a Madrid extermination and fumigation company with the name Will Kill. So I'm guessing that's a wet works company and not a real bug company. The company hired veteran survivors of Delta Commandos and included a man by the name of Lajos Martin and 2 Hungarians and a guy that was a former foreign legionnaire. Now, again, the Hungarians is interesting because there was a lot of weapons trafficking going on in Hungary at the time, selling off basically old Soviet weaponry. In July 1962, Algeria finally gained its independence. President de Gaulle declared the Algerian war is finished. There remains the terrorism. Meanwhile, high-level planning continued within the OAS for de Gaulle's elimination, and they were working inside of the networks to make that happen. So Sautre re-enters the picture, working with a secret OAS cell in Spain. He becomes the planning group and selects a suburb of Paris to ambush de Gaulle's motorcade. This occurred on August 22nd, 1962. The attack, the most infamous of all of the OAS attempts on the French president's life, and there was over 20, was a classic ambush by automatic gunfire. And this is basically what they did to Aldo Moro in Italy. The dramatic event only lasted minutes, but in the short time, the president's vehicle was raked by fire machine guns. The attempt nearly succeeded. It barely missed de Gaulle by inches. Incredibly, no one was injured. The assault team was led by an ex-French Air Force officer, Lieutenant Colonel Jean-Bastien Thury. After the attack, Bastien Thury and several others in the party were arrested and later put on trial. Bastien Thury revealed some of the details involved in the action, which he claimed was meant to be a kidnapping. A kidnapping of a dead body riddled with bullet holes. Within the OAS structure, above his level was a thing called a study group that formulated a plan based on information supplied by OAS intelligence via clandestine means, telling him basically what to do. Bastien Thury did not name the members of the study group. The French police identified the following personnel: Captain Pierre Sargent, Jean Coucracher, and Jean-René Sautre. The police believed that Sautre played a leading part in planning the attack. Evidence that this is true is revealed by the arrest afterwards of 3 other guys, all of which were employed by Sautre in his business will kill exterminations out of Madrid. A few days after the attack, French newspaper quoted Sautre as saying de Gaulle needs to be struck down like a mad dog. After the assault, nearly all of the OAS assault detachment were arrested, later to receive various sentences. Bastian 30 was eventually captured. His trial ran from January to March 1963. He was found guilty of attempted murder, crimes against the state, and was executed March 1963. Two others received similar sentences. The only man to escape capture was George Watin, Watin, also known as the Limp, who had been a member of the ultra paramilitaries in Algeria. Perhaps most telling of all was the dismissal from France of CIA station chief Al Ulmer by French President Charles de Gaulle, who suspected the CIA's complacency in the assassination attempt. Whatever gave him that idea? Beginning in January 1963, the French Senate proposed the creation of a powerful new court to deal with internal enemies of the state. It empowered the court to try traitors, rebels, mutineers, and terrorists, including many members of the OAS. They reported a wave of gangsterism spurred on by extra secret army terrorists, including armed robbery with machine guns. The internal minister blamed the violence on the transplanted French Algerians, citing the fact that OAS was running out of money. The fear was that they'd need to replenish their war chest, so that they were going to be robbing a bunch of banks and various other sundry crimes. After the assassination attempt, Sartre's name appeared in various French press reports identifying him as a major OAS leader. By January 1963, Paris papers reported he was in Spain. Then, January 1963, a U.S. Spanish newspaper cited French newspapers reporting on the arrest by French police of 11 members of OAS who had been training in Spain at a sabotage camp, one of Skorzeny's sites. That area had been used by the French dating to the period just after World War II, when the French members of the SS had retreated to Spain. A mysterious group formed in 1947 calling itself DOS 88. And we know about 88 being like High Hitler kind of thing. It was a secret German organization consisting of a group of former French collaboratist militia, Gestapo, SS, and Spanish collaborators. Most of this group were part of other French terror organizations. One of those arrested told French police that the training at that location had been done under the supervision of ex-General Gardy and Captain Sartre. It also stated that they had been entrusted with a special mission to assassinate a French deputy, Alexandre Senwante. The article went on to say that the group belonged to an OAS commando group, Monjo, Monjo, named after René Jean Mondro. Mondro was a French reserve officer who was killed by a Muslim terrorist in 1962 in Algeria. The Monjo group had been given a course of sabotage and special training set up at the French border. That's a clear reference to Skorzeny's paramilitary camps. One of those arrested, Martineau, stated that another commando team from the area was in Poitiers and had been trained in Spain as well. So basically what we're describing here is this massive effort. And keep in mind that right after World War II, French troops were being trained on that border area as well. Because remember that Skorzeny was in Paris and all the French people knew he was there. And that was all fine. And they were sending all their shock group 11s down to that border training area. It was all fine and dandy until Skorzeny began training the OAS people and the fight in Algeria, and then it got redirected onto the French president himself. And you see, that's kind of what's happening in the United States, right? We go and do all of this shit all over the world, and then it comes home to roost. And when it comes home to roost, they don't like that at all because these people, they have no allegiance. I mean, Skorzeny had no allegiance to any of the people he was hiring himself out to. None of them. He was a trained killer. Okay. In February 1963, French intelligence revealed an active plot against the president. Another one. So at the same time as the trials of Bastion 30 and 21 others arrested for the one plot, there's a new operation that was organized that involved army officers and the wife of one of the officers who had been arrested. In an attempt, de Gaulle was to be shot with a sniper rifle from a rooftop while he was visiting the War College. A key operative in this new attempt was George Wotton, the man with the limp, who had managed to escape the first attempt. French security forces also revealed that this plot was planned in Spain, which created a diplomatic stir and forced the Spanish authorities to crack down on OAS operations in their country. Several senior OAS officers were arrested, and Spanish officials arranged for the captives to be moved to the Canary Islands. Now, everybody that knows anything about Operation Gladio, hair just went up and went, Canary Islands? Because Canary Islands is one of their major training locations for Operation Gladio. So it's like hilarious that we're going to hold OAS leaders who we just arrested at the Canary Islands, where they're actually probably have already been there because that's a training site. Other OAS leaders fled to safe areas in Europe. One group went to Italy, including Jacques Costali, telling Otto Skorzeny would make several trips to the Canary Islands between February and April of that same year, ostensibly for business meetings, but in reality, it was to coordinate with the OAS leadership. When the Spanish OAS redoubt collapsed, the OAS was at a critical point. The CIA station chief in Madrid at this time was James Noel, Noel, who had replaced Archibald Roosevelt Jr. By May of 63, a die-hard OAS group made up a last-ditch effort to maintain CIA support. On orders from Major Pierre Sargent, who had assumed OAS leadership, Captain Sautré made an attempt to contact American representatives in Lisbon, Portugal, because, again, that's where Agenter Press is, and they have a huge Operation Gladio presence in Portugal because it is under a dictator as well. They were a fascist dictatorship just like Spain. Information concerning the incident is actually found in a declassified CIA report from the period. That report indicates that Sautré's request came to the CIA from a competent American observer who was notified by Western European journalists in close contact with Captain Sautré. Sautré desired to meet with the Americans. He never specifically stated that he wanted to meet with the CIA. However, a meeting was arranged with the agency representative. Since the requested meeting was in Portugal, it must be assumed that Madrid would have been too risky, given the Spanish government recently cracking down on OAS. At the meeting, Sautré was in the company of another OAS officer named Captain Yves Guillot, operating under the alias of Guerin Sirac. So that's the guy that actually set up Agenter Press in Portugal. You spell his name YVES GUERIN-SERAC. That is the guy that created Agenter Press. So his real last name is Guillou. He also had served in the Algerian War. He had also served in Indochina and the Korean War. He deserted from the 11th Shock Parachute Regiment in France, and he assumed that alias Leaves Yaren Serac. So, while in the OAS, he served with several of these people that we've been talking about, to include all of the original founders. Sartre identified himself to the CIA as the coordinator of external affairs for the OAS organization, serving under Major Pierre Sargent. He explained the overall need for U.S. assistance and getting other governments to stop suppressing OAS activities in their countries, and inquired on the possibility of obtaining logistical and monetary aid for the organization. Sartre also said he intended to provide information on the activities of the OAS that would be of interest to the U.S. The CIA representatives who were not identified asked Sartre about his status in Portugal, to which he replied he traveled on various passports, including the one from the U.S. He also claimed to have been a naturalized citizen of Martinique and had U.S. contacts that could arrange for documentation. Well, he doesn't really need U.S. documentation because he has the guy sitting next to him is in charge of Agenter Press, and they make all of the travel arrangements. A declassified CIA document states that when the meeting concluded, the CIA representative told Sartre and Yves that the U.S. had no intentions of working with anyone or group against the duly constituted government such as France, which is horse pucky. The movements of Skorzeny during this period point to his being in attendance at the Lisbon meeting between Sartre and the CIA. In fact, Skorzeny made several trips to Portugal between March and July of 63 concerning his businesses. With the OAS cause now unsustainable, it appears Sartre left the meeting with a new option for employment, signing on with Skorzeny. Captain Sartre was now a soldier of fortune, working for Skorzeny in one of the most guarded secret organizations in the history of American intelligence. So they basically just folded the OAS into the Skorzeny network, is basically what they're saying. So that concludes that chapter. Let me go through the comments here. Let's see. Israel is the largest exporter of diamonds. They don't have diamond mines. Congo does. Yeah. Above all, Alpa in the house. Oh, hello, Alpa. De Beers, Rothschilds, Cartel, Rhodes, a Soros type. Yep, that's true. Let's see what we got. Okay. Not Epstein, Liza. It was not Epstein that was found dead off the Canary Islands, girlfriend. That was Robert Maxwell. And that was in 1991. And yes, that is exactly. So the Canary Islands for us has been kind of a interesting pivot point in many different things, because it comes up in almost every major Operation Gladio story of some way. because this all ends up being such a closed network, if you will, that we have the Canary Islands. I mean, obviously, um, that just blows my mind. So we're using Canary Islands as the Operation Gladio training site, and it may be at this point um, that because this is in the 60s. I'll have to go back and look at um, our one book that we discovered the Operation Gladio training being done on Canary Islands and see what that time frame is. It may be actually Skorzeny's network that began using it, and they were using the OAS that they basically moved out there to the Canary Island as the training cadre. I mean, that's completely feasible. That the actual training for Operation Gladio cadre came from the OAS leftovers that we just read about being moved there. So the fact that Skorzeny's in Portugal meeting with the CIA, and afterwards the OAS gets folded into Skorzeny's network. Now, keep in mind, because I want to just give you the teaser for coming back. OAS, two of their operatives are in Dallas, November 22nd, 1963. And we're up to the summer of 1963 right now. So you are going to see the fruits of the labor of OAS and all of the terror training and all of the terror activity, um, and the suppressing of all of the African countries to European overlords that we're just talking about in Congo and Algeria, um, coming to fruition. These OAS terrorists are in all of these locations doing the bidding of European colonialists who only under the very uh, superficial granting of freedom to these places with no ability to control their resources and wealth, then let me just say this because I want to tie this stuff together as we learn it. So you keep in mind in like a place like Condo, they have all of these natural resources. The European overlords will not allow them to have access to their resources. So what happens to these dictators that the U.S. installs? Well, they take ginormous loans from the World Bank and the IMF. I wish Warhamster was here. And when they do that, there's no way they can pay them back. And that's where our other recent exposure was the WWF, the World Wildlife Fund, which is a CIA front company. They come in through the back door after those loans are made to the Congo and Algeria, where they have billions of dollars in resources, but the European overlords won't let them have access to it. They take out these loans, and this CIA front comes in and says, "Oh, by the way, those loans, we'll forgive those loans if you give us this big chunk of territory out of your country." And those pieces of territory are again preservations, retreat areas, natural rainforest areas. In the case of the Congo, they have like the second biggest rainforest ever. Um, and they then take possession under this world wildlife that was created by a eugenicist that hates Black people. They take possession of that property in exchange for that loan, and then they use that protected area to not let any of the people in the country come onto those reservations, and they set up terror training camps there. and they use the local people for target practice. They have this evil cycle of debauchery that goes on in all of these countries that just makes you sick to your stomach when you figure out what's going on. So, on that happy note, let me see what else we got. Um, yep, just like the slave trade, you're right. Yep. Trying to multitask. I got you, Liza. I got you, girl. Oh my gosh. Bridget just announced we went over 1,000 followers. So whoever's on here that just took us over 1,000 followers, God bless you. God bless all of you for being here. I really, really appreciate the support. We have definitely grown by leaps and bounds over the last several weeks. I really appreciate it. It's worth all the effort. Liza and Bridget are two research assistants that we talk almost every day in helping me find all of this wonderful material to bring to you guys. So, shout out to both of them and to our, um, uh, what is it? Our comrade that's not with us currently, Julie, who's always spurring us on to greater heights, who was literally the biggest cheerleader when we started this effort. God bless her and her speedy recovery. So, having said all of that, thanks for being here. Tonight's Thursday. So, we will be back here tomorrow, Friday morning, to do another show. I think it's at 9 or 10, whatever's posted on our pinned links. And our next chapter is Elsie, and basically her role in some of the things that come up. And Elsie is Skorzeny's wife. That is a very short chapter, so we're probably going to do two. And that is the other one is the mysterious QJ Win, which is a very interesting one as well. And that's a fairly long one, but we're getting close to the end. We just have like maybe 3 big chapters left. So, anyway, we'll be doing 2 chapters tomorrow morning. Be back here bright and shiny. Thank you all again for being here. I appreciate it. Yeah, please give us a thumbs up. And thanks for being here. Appreciate it.